Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic Saturday, and I hope you enjoy listening to today's stories. Doing some more backwoods, some creepy and eerie wood stories, because I know you guys like those. And we have some pretty good ones in today's video, in today's reading. Especially the last one. You guys will like it, for sure. I know I did. Thank you for listening. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps me the most. But regardless, I just enjoy the company and having you guys being here. Enjoy today's reading. I took a trip to stay in a cabin in the middle of the woods, high up in the mountains of the city of Ranger, Georgia, USA. This neighborhood was 30 minutes up in the mountains away from civilization, and even the cabins were spread far apart. The front deck of the cabin was completely exposed to the woods, so I acknowledged that any animals could stroll along if they pleased. But I stayed there for about a week, and me and my boyfriend sat outside on the front deck every night, very late, and at no point felt in danger. It was peaceful with fireflies out and sounds of crickets every night. Until the fifth night. It was eerily dark too. The moon was covered heavily. It was about midnight, and all of a sudden I didn't feel peace like I did those other nights. The forest went completely quiet and I felt a horrible sense of dread. I genuinely feared for my life. I sat there in my chair looking out into the dark forest, trying to rationalize and calm myself down, that it was all in my mind and it was just playing tricks. But all of a sudden, my boyfriend said out loud that he felt unsafe. That's when I realized it wasn't just me. We then both heard a blood-curdling scream, and we pulled out a flashlight to see what it was. Turns out it was a gray fox. They make scary screaming sounds. The weird part was the fox was running and had its ears and tail down like it was scared. This was in June, and I read that foxes scream like that when it's mating season or they're in danger. Their mating season is winter, and this happens in June, so I do believe this fox was in danger or was afraid, as well as adding to our fear. The cabin has 3 floors, and we were able to climb out the window and just sit on the roof because we wanted to still be outside and relax. Didn't matter how high up I was, I felt something truly evil and stayed inside. The only other time I felt something so evil, or like someone was watching, was when I had a few paranormal experiences at a haunted house. Georgia doesn't really get mountain lions that often. Maybe a bear, but it didn't feel that way at all. It felt unnatural. This happened in 2021, when me and 3 of my friends decided to go out late at night to go for a walk through a forest in Mission, BC to a small lake late at night. We were at the bushes before the train tracks, and we were standing there contemplating whether it was a good idea or not to move forward, going into the forest past the train tracks. For some reason, we stood there, and 2 of my friends felt uncomfortable that we were going to go, while my other friend and I were feeling adventurous and all up for the walk. So we stood there and we were like, why don't you guys want to go in? You could just go, and they felt uncomfortable and just wanted to leave. So we waited a bit longer. Then both me and my other friend felt uncomfortable. So we decided it's not a good idea to go, so that's what we didn't do. Then we heard a branch snap in the bushes, just a couple feet away from us. Like something stepped on it, but there was no other sound. It was completely silent. It wasn't a small branch either. It was a thick one. It wasn't just a snap, it was a snap. No sound of bushes moving, or any movement like something was still in the bushes watching us. So we all decided it was no good. Felt we were being observed by something or someone that could possibly be dangerous. So we took off back to the truck immediately and left. Probably just an animal, but still, who wants to take the risk of being stalked or mauled by an animal who was potentially observing you as a group? I've just stumbled onto this Reddit, and I've thoroughly enjoyed all the experiences and stories shared by others. I finally felt compelled to share an experience of my own, and while it may not be as provoking or profound as the stories told by others on this Reddit, it still fills me with a strange and mysterious feeling all these years later. I grew up on Long Island in New York State. My older sister, her boyfriend, and myself often would walk the trails and the beaches at night. On one particular evening, the three of us were on a walk at Camp Hero State Park. It was a full moon, so it was very bright out. As we were walking the trail, we stopped to relax and look out over the water. My sister's boyfriend sparked up a joint, and we were all partaking and relaxing. Whilst we were gazing out onto the open water, we spotted a small light in the distance. My sister inquired as to what we thought that was. Her boyfriend said it was probably a light on a distant boat. I agreed and we didn't think much of it. However, as moments passed, we noticed the light seemed to be approaching us, getting closer by the minute. As it moved closer, it appeared to not be on the water, but above the water in the sky. We soon realized it was not a light on a distant boat. We continued to speculate what it was, and I came to the conclusion that it must be someone's small personal drone. But as the light came closer and closer, the brightness got stronger and stronger. If you know Camp Hero, you know that there are cliff edges that hang over the water. There we are, standing there on the edge with this orb, steadily approaching us. Within the span of 5 minutes, the orb was no longer in the distance, but hanging right in front of us. It was no longer over the water, but rather over the sandy beach. We stood there staring at it. It had a whitish purple glow to it. Despite being night, it was bright out due to the light of the full moon. On this high visibility evening, it became evident this was no drone. This light was standalone, no machinery of any kind attached to it, and it just hung there about 10 feet in front of us for about 30 seconds, and then it just disappeared, in such a way that it almost seemed to envelop itself. We all decided to get the hell out of there, and that was that. This was back in 2015-ish. I've since visited this particular park many times since, and I have never seen anything like it again. Maybe we were all just a bunch of stoned teenagers and it was just some sort of delusion, but that night will stick with me forever. The park itself is shrouded in mystery, and I can only speculate that the orb was perhaps a remnant of one of the experiments conducted at Camp Hero from back in the day. So this is a story my dad recently told me about my grandpa and his great-grandpa. My grandpa grew up in a very rural southern Indiana, but moved to a very rural southern Illinois in his youth. So this takes place in Illinois. One night, Grandpa and his dad were hanging out at his uncle's who lived a couple of miles away. Keep in mind, this is the 40s out in the country, so all roads are just dirt basically. Anyway, it was pretty late, so they decided to head home and hopped into their old car, going probably about 15 miles per hour through these woods roads. At some point, as they were just driving and talking, they passed something along the edge of the road, standing upright. They both hunted and were very familiar with any animals or other local people that may be around. Neither one of them really said anything for a minute, and then they both just looked at each other and said, "What the hell was that?" My grandpa asked his dad, "Do you want to turn around?" And he said, "No." And they kept driving. My grandpa said it resembled a big owl or a small person just standing in the ditch. This event happened to me and a friend from out of town that I had invited to go hunting one afternoon. This location was in South Louisiana, in an area with thick woods and a lot of palmetto, up to 6 feet in height. In some places, and the water we had to walk in to get to my deer stands were up to our waist at times, so it was slow moving in the mile we had to walk to our deer stands. And my friend wasn't used to this tough terrain, but he kept up, and when I got to the first stand, which was 15 inches off the ground with a ladder to climb up, and once he was up, I told him I would be there to pick him up about half an hour after dark, since I wasn't half a mile past him. We had a full moon that was reflecting off the water, allowing us to hunt a few minutes longer, and when it became so dark to see, I climbed down from the deer stand with my rifle on my shoulder and started walking slowly towards my friend to pick him up. And when I was almost to his stand, I shined my light up and he wasn't in the stand. So I shined my light at the ground at the bottom of the stand, and there he was, leaning back against a tree. The stand was on and he was odd. He wouldn't look my way even after calling his name. So I walked up to him within a couple feet and asked if he was ready to go. And that's when he finally turned his head and looked towards me. And what I saw in his face scared me so bad that I took my rifle off of my shoulder, putting it between me and him. His eyes were rolled back in his head and his mouth was wide open, just standing there, looking at me, not saying a word, and was not answering me when I was asking what was wrong. So there I was, a mile or so back in the woods, with solid palmettos and up to my waist in water, with my good friend looking at me as if he was possessed and something. And yes, at this point I was scared. So I finally slapped his face, and he snapped back to himself. I asked if he was okay. His only words were, "Let's get out of here now." So with me not knowing what the fuck was going on, I made him walk in front of me the whole way back to the truck, and we got in and left without saying a word. I asked him what happened in the woods, and why did he look shocked that he was possessed, and that's when he started crying and started telling me how he was sitting there in the stand when he heard something coming through the water, moving the palmettos, as it was walking skinned alive. He had no skin at all on him, and he said he was so scared that after this thing had passed him down to climb down and hid under the stand against a tree so it wouldn't see him if he came back. He was in shock when I got to him, and that's why he looked like he did. He was so shook up and crying that I made him pull over for me to drive. Well, a week went by and I was talking to my little cousin who had gone on a tour at a near Indian memorial, and they were explaining how this Indian tribe would skin men of the tribe alive and turn them loose into the woods when they had committed a serious crime in the tribe. And my friend, who had witnessed this skinned man a week earlier, wasn't from around this area and had no way of knowing this. So what did he see that put him in such a shock? Was it a ghost of one of these Indians who was skinned alive years ago? I don't know. I just know the shape my friend was in when I got to him that night in the woods will be something I'll never forget. When I was a kid, I lived in Clinton. Both parents worked full-time, so I was often sent over to stay with my grandparents, who had a plot of land in the vicinity of, but not right in Mosheim, near Greeneville. Both of them had lived there for their whole lives, in the area for a good many years. They had been established at their home for some decades before this story and remained there a good time after. Recently, I had reason to return to that area. After having spent the majority of my adult life there, being in and around the area, driving the same roads made me reminiscent about my lazy summer days tucked away at my grandparents'. Learning to shoot on the same .22 with which Grandpa had taught Mom, feeding fish at the neighbor's stocked pond, or spotting deer and bear with binoculars from the back porch. When I relayed this to my mom, she in turn told me a story about a time I scared my grandpa half to death, then lied about hanging out with Bigfoot. At first, I had no idea what she was on about. Then I remembered exactly what actually happened with startling clarity. New context given by the experience adulthood provides. And no, this is not about Bigfoot or a cryptid. Before we start, some information about my grandparents' land. Their house was on a small hill surrounded by grass lawn. The lawn gave way to a smallish hayfield, then the wood line. Those woods lasted for a good half mile to either side of the home, and a good several miles to the back. I hated the hayfield because it was too pokey to play in, but liked to hang out in the creek that ran behind it. To get there, I would walk to the edge of the property, just in the woodline to avoid the hay. While at my grandparents', the only rules were that I stay where I could see the house, so the house could see me. I was to take a whistle with me anywhere I went. I didn't take the whistle, seeing it as a badge of my regrettably young age, and the best part of the creek was out of sight of the house. That was the only stretch where it got deeper than my knees, and thus the only part where I could swim. Naturally, I spent much of my time in that water splashing around, skipping stones, and being a kid. One day I was playing in the creek when I noticed someone. It was a man, a stranger, on the bank, watching me. He had long hair, a beard, and pale skin so dirty it was stained. I could not tell his age and simply thought of him as old. I have no better guess now, as he clearly went through long years of hard living. He wore no shirt on, no pants, only a wrap of dirty cloth around his waist that I thought of as a Moses dress, thanks to some illustrated Bible stories. Around his neck there were multiple necklaces made from knotted tatters of cloth, fiber, and string. In those knots were various pieces of detritus, mostly bones, but some flowers and bits of dark glass. When I first saw him there by the creek, I was terrified. Frozen still. The man, however, was smiling. He gestured from his squat with an outstretched arm, fingers down, and a kind of "don't stop for me" wave. I didn't react, startled and reeling. Then he splashed at me, still smiling. He did it again. I splashed back, and soon we were playing. We both threw water at each other. He jumped into the creek and stomped around with me, laughing all the while. He threw rocks into the water, and so did I. I pushed him. He pushed me back. We carried on for some minutes until my grandma called for me. With her voice a switch had turned off. The man stopped in his tracks, gaze fixed back towards the house. Then, as my grandma kept on hollering, he looked to me. He crept back to his side of the creek, barely disturbing the water, and slid into the brush, completely silent the whole way, holding my gaze. Once he was out of sight, I waited in the water until my grandma found me. She wanted to know if I was alone. I said no. She became very tense, asking who was with me while looking around. I didn't answer. Didn't know how. Seeing no one, she pulled me back to the house without any words, gripped like iron the whole time. At the house, the real inquisition began. I didn't really have any new words. The event and the reaction overwhelming my ability to explain. Such silence further irked my grandma, and I was swiftly placed in a corner. held without bail, awaiting patriarchal judgment. Around an hour later, my grandpa came home from work. He was told about my churlishness and was ready to set into me again when I started talking. I told him about the man, hairy and old, dressed like Moses, about how we played, then he disappeared. I remember they digested this for a few minutes before sending me to my room. I was happy to go. The happier still Grandpa did not yell like he usually did when I misbehaved. Later, I was brought out for dinner. I ate in the kitchen with Grandma, but Grandpa called to me to the back porch. He was on a swinging bench, looking out over the hayfield turned red by the setting sun. He had kicked off his boots and put them next to his shotgun. I knew that was odd for the gun to be out of the closet. Previously, we had used it to shoot bottles. Sometimes we'd throw them into the air like they were clay pigeons. These escapades were accompanied with speeches about how the gun was dangerous and only for adults to use. He went through my story again, his tone deadly serious. Eventually, he asked me how hairy was the man. Really? I told him very. Thinking this was the right answer, he asked where. I told him everywhere, like a bear. He ruminated on this and I grew more nervous, worried I was in trouble or causing trouble, just wanting the trouble, wherever it lie, to end. So when he finally asked me to swear, in this name of Christ and on the mother, that I was telling the truth about everything, I said I had been joking. He finally yelled then, and then sent me back to my room. The family memory became that I had hid by the creek and made up a tale about Bigfoot. At the time, everyone was very upset with me, and I was forbidden from going back to that creek or anywhere out of sight. The enforcement of this rule, like the others, was lackluster. Even so, for a time I didn't go back to the creek. In my memory, I stayed away for a very long time, but I am sure it was only for a few days. That hiatus feeling interminable with my elementary age self. When I did start going back to the creek, I took a bucket of toys and a thick stick plucked from the wood line on the way. I think I was conflicted about what to do if the man came back, imagining either impressing him with my toy collection or clubbing him, or both in turn. When he did show back up, he appeared next to me as I dozed under a tree on my side of the creek. I was once again gripped with terror. He was not smiling, his face expressionless as he lurked beside me, having watched for who knows how long before I smelled him. I scrambled away, leaving behind my stick and toys. Coming to my feet a yard out, I stood in the sun while the man watched me from the shade. Eventually, he crouched and started to look through my bucket. I remember becoming indignant as he examined my toys one by one, only to toss them into the dirt. It became too much and I started to lecture the man, telling him how he got me into trouble, how he was a weirdo, how he stank. At some point, he stopped looking through my things and calmly watched my tirade. Face still neutral, eyes analytic. Once I had concluded my lecture, I sat back under the tree to pout. Having become hot in the sun, I remember the man made a noise, a grinding kind of sort, and when I looked over at him, he was chuckling while he inspected the last few figures in my bucket. I wanted to laugh too, but was more determined to stay sullen. Once everything was out of the bucket, he put one of the figures, Ghidorah, back into the bucket. He then stood to his hunched fullest, took the bucket by its handle, began to make his way back into the woods. I stayed by the tree until he turned, said something, not a word I know or know, and gestured with a forward sweep of his hand. At first I didn't comply despite knowing he wanted me to follow. After a few moments he yipped, clicked his teeth, and gestured again more empathetically. With this further prompt, I did get up and come along, the man making approving noises and putting on his smile again. We went into the woods. The man led, but he was naturally quicker and quieter, making it hard to keep up. Eventually, he would stop when he lost me, knocking on the trees with sticks and whistling rhythmically so that I may find him in the vegetation. He never came back for me, opting instead to guide me forward with the noises. I became lost, having only a vague sense of my grandparents' place being behind me. After some time, maybe 15 minutes, we came to a bald. The man had me wait there, indicated by patting the ground, before going into the tree line alone. He returned from the different direction pulling a sled. It was made from half of a discarded plastic drum and lined with small pellets and smooth bark. On the back half there rested the fly-covered carcass squirrels, opossums, and other critters savaged into anonymity. On the pulling end, woven pouches were tied into a place on it by the same electric cordage that made the man's necklaces. He put my bucket on the sled and tossed Ghidorah into a pouch. He then called me closer with a glottal noise and beckoning wave. I saw the sled's pouches held many odds and ends: dried salamanders, mushrooms, metal bits, glass fragments. From one of the man pulled a square made from bound together sticks, just big enough to slip over my wrist. From another, he pulled a piece of fool's gold and a small shard of geode crusted with a bit of purple crystal. These he handed to me with an air of business and a few more utterings of nonsense. He then patted the ground for me to sit again. I did so without much bewilderment, understanding we had traded the same as exchanging Pokemon cards at recess. I did not much miss Ghidorah anyway. He was always the bad guy. The bucket was a loss. In retrospect, I think Ghidorah was chosen because its dull gold scales resembled something valuable. The bucket for its obvious ability to hold things. The man came back and gestured for me to follow by slapping his thigh. I did this readily. During the hike back, I tried to keep up and pay attention. I did so moderately well. Having to be whistled over a few times, I did notice that our path was not straight. The man led me one way and then another, making turns unneeded by the lay of the land. We eventually came out by the creek, but from a different approach than we had left. I could hear my grandma calling for me again, not from up on the hill, but from out in the field. The man would not cross the creek, but pushed me to do so. I did, but did not go to my grandma. Instead, I crept back to the house and around the opposite side. There, I laid the shrubs by our front door, pretending to sleep. I swore I had been there the whole time. When I was sent back to my room, I placed my fool's gold, crystal, and charm in my bedside table for safekeeping. The next day, I went back to the creek to pick up my toys. The man was not there. However, throughout the summer, he did visit me again, to sit under the tree, or throw rocks at the water, or yammer softly to himself. I would bring snacks and candy to share, and he would likewise give me stringy dried meat, which I ought to not have ate, or honeysuckle blossoms, which I still would eat, taken from my old bucket. He seldom visited long, and never splashed and whooped like he did on the first meeting. At this point, you may be wondering why I posted to Backwoods Creepy and not Backwards Weird but Wholesome, I guess. But there are two more occasions I wanted to account. One gruesome, one awful. The eventful one occurred near the 4th of July. I had brought 2 boxes of bank snaps to the creek. The man was initially wary of the little fireworks, but quickly came to appreciate their miniature pyrotechnics. He took the box I gave him gratefully, even taking the empty box, likely for the wood shavings, which are excellent tinder. During the use of the bank snaps, I had scared a turtle into the water and to the opposite bank. It sat there watching us from a far shore. The man, after stowing the bank snaps in the bucket, noticed the turtle, With little thought, he scooped up into a smooth stone and threw it with force and accuracy into the turtle. He then waded over to retrieve the slider, which struggled meekly in his grasp. One leg knocked clean off. On my side of the river, he took from the bucket a new piece of stone. One side was rounded and fit in his hand. The other came to a flinty cutting edge. Working with deft experience, the man began chopping the live turtle above its neck. Pulling up on the shell top, the thing struggled and bled as it was bisected, the dome eventually coming free. The turtle dropped to mingle its viscera with dirt and sand. The man rinsed the shell in the river, then offered it to me. In wordless horror, I ran. That evening, I came back to shuffle the dead turtle into the flowing waters of the creek. The shell itself was nowhere to be found. This experience did not deter me from going to the creek, or the man from visiting me again. However, sometimes he would try to call me away from the creek with thumps and whistles. I would tell him I heard him and refused to move. On some occasions, he would join me. On others, he would leave. The last time we met, we were sitting under the tree sharing cowtails. From the woods, there came whistling and the staccato knocking of a woodpecker. The man looked up and whistled back. There were a few more such exchanges before he stood, collected his bucket, and beckoned for me to follow. I was curious and felt comfortable with the man as a guide, so I did as asked. He took me to the bald, a direct path this time, periodically stopping to call or respond to the other in the wood. Waiting for us at the bald was a woman and a child. The woman was dressed the same as the man, topless, wrapped at the waist. She was dirty with long hair and a wiry frame. The child was in a similar state, wearing a sack that went to their knees. The man sat on the ground and the woman joined him, sitting in his lap but leaning forward so that her elbows rested on her crossed knees. She had dark brown eyes that were fixed to me. The other child would not look up. I didn't know what to do and didn't speak. The other kid lifted their sack to wipe up their nose, and I learned under all that dirt they were a her. The man made a noise and drummed on woman's bare back. The kid looked at them, still hanging her head, hair covering her face. The woman yammered and swatted at the girl lazily, the man echoing her noises, slapping skin to skin once more. At this bizarre scene, the girl stumbled towards me, stopping close enough I could smell her and hear her wheezing breath. She was thin, but not emancipated, and slightly taller than me should she have straightened up. The man and woman fussed some more, then the girl leaned close and pressed her cheek to mine. Her hair was in between us, greasy and cold. She made no move to embrace me, no move at all, only pressing limply against me and breathing so loud it was all I could hear. During this time, the woman had approached. She pulled the girl back by her shoulder with one hand and delivered a flurry of slaps to the crown of the girl's head. The woman then gathered the girl's hair in one hand, using the other to sweep back her bangs. The girl was then made to look at me, face bare. One side of her jaw was bulged out, smooth skin over a lemon-shaped bump. Her mouth was twisted by this deformity. Her nose faced to one side as if affixed sideways and leaked a trail of clear snot. One eye was bulged and roomy, the other startlingly regular. It looked at me, blank and dark brown. The woman gave the girl's head a little shake, spat off to the side, then cooed like a dove as she smiled at me. I fled. There was commotion behind me. I think the girl was pushed to the ground. I did not look back and they did not pursue. My flight ended at my grandparents' house, my absence unnoticed. I chose not to tell anyone what happened, wanting to forget, not wanting to get into trouble, not thinking about the girl, the couple, what was intended for me. I spent that August inside whenever I visited my grandparents'. I begged not to be taken, claiming it was boring and lonely. Sometimes when I sat on the porch or went from the car to the house, I'd catch a snippet of bird call on the wind or the distant tapping of wood and hurry inside. My grandma could tell something was wrong and made an effort to entertain me in town. My grandpa cared in his own way, involving me in his errands as he never had before. Eventually, school started. Classes and friends eased me away from the thoughts of the dirty man or the people in the clearing. Time did the rest. I think now that all of the people in the clearing were of a family, but their features, white skin, brown eyes, brown hair, are common enough that they all could have been unrelated. I am sure they lived together. They knew each other's signs and signals. They used their own words. I know that the Smokies are full of tales of feral people, wild men, and superstition. I also know that they are full of people living in unlikely ways in unlikely places, and that those people call others kin, and that through the chain of human connection, even a recluse living in a rundown shack is somebody. I guess I am asking if the people in my story are someone, or if they are known, or if their behavior rings any bells, belies any known intention. I figured here, where the tale would not be disconnected out of hand, might be the right place to ask. Thank you everyone for listening. If your story was told, I'm glad I'm the one who could tell it. I appreciate all the love and support, and I hope you enjoy today's stories as much as I did reading them.